as educators. Some of you are students out there that every student out there has something to bring back to their peers and to their schools, and I hope you guys can get something out of this too. If any of you are interested in getting more the word out to other organizations, we have a kind of a speakers bureau that we take to organizations to speak about methamphetamine and raise the general awareness. So if you know of any groups of parents, groups, business people, service clubs, anybody like that who you think this would be appropriate outlet for, please write them on this piece of paper. And without further ado, I am proud to introduce David Parnell, and I will. Can you guys hear us pretty well? Or do you want the mic?
Okay. You can probably hear me pretty good in the back, huh? Okay, I won't use the mic. We can go ahead and turn the lights. I want to tell you a little bit about myself before I get going with my program. I'm a recovered meth addict, recovering alcoholic, and an ex-convict. I'm also the husband to a wonderful woman named Amy and the father of 7 beautiful children. I come here to talk to you about methamphetamine. I'm going to mention a couple of different drugs tonight, but my program is mainly geared for the drug meth. I believe it's one of the most addictive and the most destructive drugs that our country's ever seen. Addiction is addiction. It'll all kill us if we abuse it long enough and hard enough. It just seems like meth kills a lot faster than a lot of the other drugs do. Meth goes by many different names. We call it crank, crystal, ice, speed, go fast, and many more nicknames that we've given this drug. It really depends on what part of the United States you live in, depends on what they call it. For example, where I live in Tennessee, we call meth crank, but not far down the road from us in Missouri, a lot of areas over there, they call it go fast. It's all methamphetamine. Meth comes in many different colors. This is some yellow meth. This is a crystallized form of the drug. Some of the purest and most potent form of the drug. When we say it's the purest form, we don't mean that it's pure as far as it not being harmful to the human body. There's no such thing as a meth that's not harmful to the human body. This is some pink meth and some white meth. I'm just trying to give you an idea of how many different colors this drug may come in. I've seen it when it was bluish and greenish, even when it was brown and looked like coffee grinds. It doesn't matter what color it is, it's all meth, and it definitely will kill that user. It's so potent. It doesn't matter how we get this drug in our system. As long as we get it in our bodies, this drug will get you high. You can smoke it, snort it, inject it, orally eat it. Don't set your open drink around somebody you don't trust, because they can take a scoop of this drug, put it in whatever it is you're drinking. It works just as good drinking it as it does smoking it or snorting it. But smoking seems to be one of the most popular ways that people use it, though, because they get off a lot faster smoking it than you do snorting it or eating it. This girl here is smoking with a glass pipe. They usually get these glass pipes from these little rose jars out of a regular convenience store. People also take a light bulb and turn that into a glass pipe. Where I live in Tennessee, they usually smoke their meth on a piece of tin foil, just like this guy's doing. They put the dope on the tin foil, put some heat to it. As it starts melting, it puts off the smoke. They suck the smoke up with some kind of hard, hollow plastic, like this guy here is using a big ink pen he's taking apart. That's the most common thing, because the straw, the heat is so intense it'll melt the straw down too quick, so they use some kind of hard, hollow plastic. I tell parents, when you're looking through your kids' rooms looking for drug paraphernalia, and I do promote searching the kids' rooms, not to invade on their privacy, but to love them enough to check on them. Because the parents are usually always the last ones to find out about the kids' drug use. And if we can catch people in the early stages of any addiction, a lot of times we can get them help and get them treatment and end up saving their life a lot of times. Look for things like those glass pipes. Also, if they're snorting their meth, you can look for some kind of hard surface, like maybe a mirror or razor blade. That the razor blade or a knife, and it still may have some residue on the edge of that blade. Also, you may be looking for a little short piece of straw or a rolled up dollar bill. If they're eating their meth like I used to eat mine, basically all you can look for is the empty baggies with the residue still in it, or the dope itself. I used to take my meth and I'd take a big scoop of it, put it in a piece of toilet paper, wad it up like a ball, like a little peel, and I would just swallow it with some Pepsi. If they're shooting their meth up like this guy's shooting his up, you want to look for the needles, some kind of cord or rubber hose they're using to tie their arm off with. But more importantly, you're looking for a spoon that will be blackened on the bottom. As you can see, this guy here is definitely killing himself by putting that needle in his arm. And more than likely, if he hasn't stopped shooting up by now, he's probably dead because this is a pretty old photo. And in some areas of the United States, shooting up meth is probably the second most popular way behind smoking it for a person to be able to use it. One of the problems we have with this drug spreading across around the world like it has, and it's really a worldwide epidemic. I've done things in Berlin, Germany, New Zealand, Australia. I just did a magazine interview just a month ago out of a country called Czech. I didn't even know where that was at. My wife said it was somewhere over by Germany. I've been to London, England last year. When I was using, I didn't realize that meth was all around the world. But this is really a worldwide epidemic, I believe. One of the problems is not only that it's so addictive, it's so easy to manufacture. You can go to about any local hardware store, get most of the chemicals you need to make it. The main ingredient being in cold medicine, plus the internet has helped spread the problem. There's thousands of recipes on the internet on how to manufacture meth. But a lot of them recipes are wrong. They either have steps missing or steps that are backwards. And when you got young people dealing with these kind of explosive chemicals, they need to make sure they have the steps right. They'll end up like this guy. He blowed himself up in his home. Here's another one that blowed himself up, and another one. Even when they got all the steps right, all it takes is just one mistake to cause that explosion. This house here caught on fire. The parents made it out, but 2 little children ended up burning up in the home. It can be something as simple as them lighting a cigarette in a room that's not ventilated very well, or sweating real heavy on the lithium strips we use out of camera batteries because lithium and moisture are such a bad combination. This guy here had a small explosion in his kitchen. It didn't kill him, but it did burn him very bad. Here's another one that had a small explosion we call a flashback. He's actually one of the luckier ones. All it did to him was peel the outside of his hand off. You see the fingernails made over here on the right-hand side. On his left-hand side is what's left of his hand. My program is a very graphic program, but it's a real program. Everything I show you is real. I don't try to glamorize the drugs. I just try to lay it out there and tell the truth about it and the results of what happens to people fooling around with these kind of poisons. And I'm not trying to make a small deal out of this guy getting his hand, the outside of his hand blowed off, but he is very lucky. I'll show you why I say that in just a second. Here's another one that got burnt. This one here didn't actually get burnt from a fire. This guy spilled some of the chemicals on the outside of his hand that we use in the process of manufacturing meth. And you can see what those chemicals did to the outside of his body. Well, these chemicals are doing the same thing to the inside of us users' bodies. As we put these drugs in our system to get high, these drugs are just slowly eating us alive. Here's why I said the first guy was so lucky, because this young man here wasn't near as lucky. He was cooking in the bathroom of his trailer. He had an explosion. It blew him into the bathtub and it burned him alive. Here's another one that made one mistake cooking meth. It was the last mistake he ever made in his life. That's where the fire department found him when they put the house out. And unfortunately, this is what's happening every day in the United States. Young teenagers and young adults are killing themselves trying to manufacture this poison. The saddest thing about this story was not only did it kill him, but it also killed his teenage brother who was helping him cook the meth that day. The police will tell you that they have found meth labs every place that you can imagine. This one here is a mobile lab. We call them mobile labs because everything the guy needs to cook meth he had in the trunk of the car. These are the hardest ones, I believe, for the police to find because they're not set up in one location all the time. They'll have 5 or 10 different spots throughout a county, and every other day they're in a different spot cooking the meth. They try never to cook the same spot 2 days in a row. It makes it very difficult to catch them. They find labs on the side of the roads, in old abandoned barns and shacks, in makeshift huts in the woods, in $500,000 homes. Here's everything the guy needed was in a suitcase. Wherever he went, he could carry his meth lab with him. They find labs in hotel rooms. This one here is one they found in a hotel room. Not only is this guy dead, there's 2 other people also dead in the motel room, a young girl and a young man, because they didn't have the room ventilated, they didn't have the windows open. In a matter of just a few minutes, those poisonous fumes killed all 3 people. They found labs in people's bedrooms, even in children's bedrooms, like this one here set up in a child's bedroom. I believe many children lived in a home where there's heavy meth use. Not just a home where they're manufacturing a drug, but a home where there's heavy use like my kids had to live, are being abused, either by neglect or so many times physical abuse. Where I live in Tennessee, we have been devastated by meth. A few years ago, Tennessee ranked number 2 in the United States. We're having the most meth labs out of all the other states as far as the production goes. Our labs have dropped a little bit. The usage has not dropped any at all. And you can see how when this drug moves into an area, how it spreads like a cancer. You can see in 1999, in Tennessee where I live, they have found 143 labs, and you can check out your own state how that they usually increase. The next year it almost doubled, and then doubled again, 600, 900, and this drug is just like a cancer. The DEA says that every lab that the police find, they estimate they miss at least 5 to 10. Well, just say they miss 5. They got up the year after this and well, we found 1,800 labs. Well, you times that by 5, gives you an idea of how bad it was where I live. 4 years ago in Tennessee, the University of Vanderbilt hospital burn unit averaged 4 to 5 burn cases a week come in from meth labs exploding. This young lady here is from Tennessee. As you can see, she's very lucky. She's like me. She's a very lucky person. Lived through it. She's going to be scarred the rest of her life. But at least she's still alive. Now she's turned her life around. But so many times it isn't the adults, but it's the small children who pay that ultimate price. This little boy here was trapped in the home where the parents was cooking meth. When it exploded, the blast hit him right in the face. It didn't kill him. He's still alive. But he's going to be scarred for the rest of his life because of his parents' bad decisions to cook that poison in the home with this baby. Our child abuse in Tennessee has jumped up over 500% over the last decade because of meth use. That's one thing you can expect in any area this drug comes in contact with. Child abuse is going to skyrocket. The police had the statistics to show that from California all the way to New York, every place this drug comes in contact with, child abuse skyrocketed. The federal government just put out a few months ago the top 3 crimes that go up in a neighborhood when meth comes into the neighborhood. Number 1 was theft. Number 2 was domestic violence. And number 3 was child abuse. But it isn't just domestic violence against young women. It's also sexual violence that always go up. I was in Wisconsin in the county 3 years ago doing programs. A year and a half before meth hit that county, they had 7 sexual assaults against young women. In a matter of a year and a half after meth became a heavily abused drug in that county, sexual assaults went from 7 to 21. It tripled in a year and a half because of meth use. This baby here, the dad said he spilled bleach on himself. Regular bleach that you wash clothes with. I didn't even know bleach would burn you like that, but I guess if you leave it on your skin long enough, that it will. All his dad had to do was take him to the bathroom, run some cold water over him, wash some bleach off, or take him to the hospital. But see, this drug becomes king of people's life. It becomes more important than taking care of their children, taking care of themselves. This dad here said that he was cooking a batch of meth and he wanted to finish cooking his dope before he did anything to help the kid. You can see what putting those drugs before the child's welfare ended up costing. This kid here is going to be scarred for the rest of his life. I put this section of my program about the children because that's where the true passion of my heart lies, is with the kids, and they are the true victims of any addiction. I don't care if it's marijuana, alcohol, cocaine, heroin, or meth. The kids are always the true victims. And so many times they are the silent victims. They don't have a voice to speak out for themselves. I try to be a voice for the kids to educate the public on what they're going through. But I'm going to be honest, there's no possible way I can stand up here in front of you and put into words what a lot of these little kids are going through. It's so traumatic on them unless you've been through it yourself. But I can try my best. You notice the sores around this little girl's mouth? Those are actually cockroach bites that's all around her mouth. She was living in such harsh conditions. I believe we live in the greatest country in the world, but yet in our country, every year, hundreds of kids are being raped and murdered by people around them. So many times, it's people around them they're supposed to be taken care of who are strung out on some kind of substance like alcohol or drugs and are abusing them. Just last year alone in Colorado, they're going through a court case right now where I got an email 2 weeks ago where they had 13 children murdered. And they said that if the child service had did their jobs right, that a lot of them kids would still be alive. But I'm not trying to blame it on child service because I know that they are overwhelmed. Just like in Tennessee, they're overwhelmed. There is so much abuse towards children in our country nowadays. Every child deserves to be loved and have a good chance at life. Unfortunately, it's not like that in the United States. I hope one day that it will be, though. This little kid here is holding a gun. Not only are the kids in meth homes and homes where people are using cocaine exposed to lots of different firearms because of the paranoia brought on by these drugs, but it seems like, especially with meth, that the little children are usually exposed to lots of different pornography also. Here's another kid they pulled out of a meth lab. When it caught on fire, her parents went off and left her in there to burn up. As you can see, it about burned her little fingers off. She lived 3 weeks in the hospital before she did die. Her parents never come to see her when she's in the hospital. They didn't go to her funeral, but yet they caught the parents 2 months later in a different state buying chemicals to make more meth. And what I tell people is that it takes a powerful drug, man, to cause a set of parents not to even go to their own baby's funeral. But this is a very powerful drug on the human mind, and people will do things on this drug that we never dreamed in our wildest imaginations that we would be capable really of doing. It seems like a lot of times it isn't the physical abuse, it's neglect that the children are going through. You have parents that will stay awake for 2 or 3 weeks at a time without sleeping. It's not uncommon anymore for people to stay up well over 20 days. And when they do pass out, man, they're out for a couple of days. You couldn't wake them up with a cannon. And when you got a little kid like this running around in the house, there's no possible way that they can cook or clean for themselves. They're just left up severely neglected. Plus, that's where we see a lot of the children being sexually abused, because the parents will have all these strange people hanging around their house strung out on meth. And when they leave their little children around those meth heads, these little kids are just left up at the mercy of whoever's over at that home. Here's another kid they pulled out of a meth lab. This kid here tested positive for meth, just like if the baby had been using the drug himself. And about 33% of the kids they pull out of meth labs do test positive for meth. You notice the sores on his face and his neck? Those are sores caused by the toxic chemicals he was breathing. They was making his body break out into sores, and taking the drug itself to get high will break a lot of people's bodies out into sores that look kind of like acne, but it's not actually acne, and I'll talk more about that in just a second. If you don't remember none of the kids, I hope that you'll remember this little 2-year-old girl found stuffed in a box, locked up in the back bedroom. Her parents in the living room getting high on meth. They had her locked up back there so they wouldn't have to listen to her cry and deal with it. She had chemical burns on her face that they said she did to herself. I'll never believe that, because she had a burn pattern on her lower back where they had been torturing her with a blow dryer and a fractured bone where they had never taken her through the hospital with. Can you imagine being an adult at your age? I can't imagine being 41 years old, going 3 or 4 days without any medical attention. Can you imagine being 2 years old like this? Here's the burn on her back with the blow dryer. And I have noticed across the country, I hear these stories on a weekly basis. Last year we did 230 programs. We averaged 2 a week, and I was gone sometimes up to 6 weeks at a time, not going home to see my wife and my kids. And I would hear these stories almost every week, and a lot of times I noticed that they would be torturing the kids with blow dryers and curling irons and stuff like that. I don't know what it is about those kind of things that they're using, but the blow dryer is a pretty common thing, it seems like. Here's another kid they found at a meth lab when the police pulled up. This kid was in the front yard playing with meth garbage, an old car battery. That's what you saw over the little hands, his mouth, his battery acid and dirt. About 35% of the labs that the police raid had got children present in those labs. This picture here, I noticed, was on your pamphlets laying around. I've actually got this on videotape where you can see the actions of the mother and the baby, and it always amazed me that cops are running all through the house, the mother's crying, she reaches for the baby doesn't even, he looks at her like she's crazy, he doesn't reach for her, and he's not crying. I think this baby has got one of the symptoms that they talk about, where the kids have never been showed any affection, any love, and when the police come in, a lot of times they don't even cry for the parents because they're not used to the affection from the parents. This is baby Haley. Baby Haley is from Tennessee, and because of the abuse that she went through at the hands of her dad and her stepmom, we now have a law in Tennessee called the Haley Law, named after baby Haley. Just gives people more prison time for manufacturing meth and abusing children. But baby Haley's very lucky in a lot of ways. She lived through the physical abuse. So many of the children don't live through the physical abuse like little Bobby here. He didn't live through the physical abuse. Little Bobby come home addicted to meth. His mother used through the pregnancy, and his mother starved little Bobby to death. And a lot of people, like I've said, I think in the beginning, they don't realize how extent child abuse is in our country. This is not an uncommon thing. We had a case just a few years ago in Chattanooga where a mom and dad were strung out on meth. They beat their 3-month-old baby boy to death. When they found that little boy, he had 21 broken bones, cigarette burns and cuts from the top of his head to the bottom of his feet. And I'm talking about a 3-month-old baby. I was in Indiana last year. Right before I got to Indiana, they had a man brutally rape a 3-year-old girl who was strung out on meth. When he got finished raping that little girl, he stomped her to death. I was in Duluth, Minnesota last year. Just a couple months before I got to Duluth, I was having lunch with a police officer and a child service worker. They told me, they said, right before you got here, we arrested a mother strung out on meth who was prostituting out her 1-year-old daughter to get money to buy meth. And my first question to him was, does she have any customers? I could not believe anybody, whether it's a grown man, a young man, or anybody, would buy a 1-year-old girl to rape her. And they said at least 3 that we knew of, and 2 of those was repeat offenders. These are the kind of hell that kids are living through in our country because of drug and alcohol addiction. When they say that it's a victimless crime, that it only affects the users, they don't know what the heck they're talking about whenever they say stuff like that. Let them go tell little Bobby that, oh, I forgot little Bobby's dead. They can't tell him that. I hope one day, when I get to heaven, I can tell little Bobby, I got his picture from a guy named Ron Mullins, works with Homeland Security. And me and Ron Mullins share the same thoughts on this. We both hope that we can tell little Bobby one day when we see him, we told as many people as we could about his story, in hopes in some way his death wouldn't be in vain, and maybe it would help another kid somewhere. Let's get back to baby Haley. This is what baby Haley looked like when they brought her to the hospital. You can see from her elbow all the way around, there's not a spot on her little body that don't have a bruise where they was beating her. And as you can tell, I get pretty passionate about the child abuse, because like I told you at the beginning, that's where the true passion in my heart lies. They had a couple other kids in the home, but they wasn't beating on them kids like they was the baby, because they was afraid the teachers would see the bruises and turn them into the police. So they took most of their anger and frustration out on the 3.5-year-old who wasn't in school. The doctors had to reconstruct her ears, her cheekbones, her nose, and her mouth, and they had to surgically open her eyelids because the parents had chemicals set up in a spray bottle. When they wanted to torture the baby, they'd make her stand there and they'd spray those chemicals directly in her eyes. When they brought her into the hospital, both her eyes was matted shut. This is what she looks like today. She's more beautiful than ever. Her dad, if he's lucky enough to live to be an old man, he's going to die in our Tennessee state prison system for what he did to this baby, thank God. They give him 95 years. He'll never get out. The stepmother, they give 20 years. This is a picture of her sitting in the governor's lap. This is our Governor Bredesen when they were signing a law into effect named after her. You know, the youth come to us, want to know what we're going to do about a society that hurts so many of them. And this was actually quoted by Franklin D. Roosevelt in 1936. That question has never been answered. In some areas, child abuse is far worse now than it ever was in 1936. Here's some of the conditions that children had to live in my neighborhood and all over the country because of meth. Very harsh conditions. When people first get on this drug, it seems like that they're pretty productive because it is a stimulant. We even call a lot of functional addicts. They're able to go to work. Some of them will even work on their places. Some will even overgroom themselves, especially young women I've noticed constantly brushing their hair and stuff. But once this addiction really gets a hold of a person, they no longer care what they look like. They don't care what their places look like. All they really care about is just getting high. This home here had 4 kids that lived in it. At night, the kids would walk across that garbage and go lock themselves in the back room because so many rats came out in the house after dark. The children were scared to leave that back bedroom. Here's another home where 3 little kids slept on this mattress. The only problem was the users in the home was hiding their used needles up under the mattress where the baby slept. For some reason, a lot of times the drug users think if they hide their drugs and their paraphernalia in the kids' bedrooms, that if the police raid the house, that they won't find the dope in the kids' rooms. It's such a common thing where I live that my sheriff said when he raids a house looking for drugs, if the people have children, he said the first place we go look for the dope is to the kids' bedrooms, to the baby bags, because it is such a common thing. This is a refrigerator from the first house with all the garbage. As you can see, the 4 children was absolutely starving to death. I remember a few years ago, my refrigerator used to look empty like that quite often. I hate it when people say marijuana is not an addictive drug. It's a very addictive drug. I smoked it for 23 years when I could smoke it. I had cravings for it. It wasn't as bad as the cravings I had for cocaine or meth, but I nevertheless had cravings for that drug. I know my dad, he thought they should legalize marijuana. He said he didn't think it was addictive, but yet when he didn't have a joint, he was about as mean as a snake, and he usually took it out on us kids. We couldn't wait for him to smoke a joint so he could calm down. But I'll never forget asking my dad one time, I said, well, how long have you been smoking if you don't think it's addictive? He said, 35 years. He said, but I could quit anytime I wanted. I thought, man, that's the craziest thing I ever heard in my life. It is a very addictive drug. It's not a killer drug like most of drugs. I'm not going to sit up here and try to tell you something that I don't believe is true. But what makes marijuana a killer drug is 80–90% of heroin addicts and cocaine addicts started out on marijuana and moved up those harder drugs. I'll never forget one time my wife told me, she said, we're out of food, the babies are out of milk. She said, go buy the kids a gallon of milk. I told her, I said, I'm not buying the kids no milk. I said, call the grandparents, let them pick her up some milk. I said, all I have in my pocket is $30 and I'm out of marijuana. I took that last $30 and bought me a bag of marijuana. And I tell people, if that's not addiction, that a guy would do something like that. There's no such thing as addiction. Every pound of methamphetamine produced creates 5 to 6 pounds of toxic waste that go into our environment. These people was dumping it in their backyard. When they seen the police pulling up, they told the poor kids to go out the back door of the trailer and hide under the trailer. They didn't want the police to see how starved the children was. The only problem was the trailer had a busted sewage line, and that's where the police found those kids, laying up in the middle of that raw sewage because they were scared to death of their dad because of violence he witnessed in the home by him. They've done anything he told them. Just like my kids were scared to death of me because of violence they witnessed me do to people in front of them and to their mother, I'm sure they've done anything I told them. One thing I noticed about meth users, every one of them I've ever seen become more aggressive and more violent when they got on this drug than they was before they started using. Now, I'm not saying they're going to become a killer. I'm just saying they become more aggressive and more violent than they was before they started using. Our first meth murder case in the state of Tennessee over a decade ago, we've had a meth problem now for about 15 years or so. Our first meth murder case that they investigated was a young man. When the dope deal went wrong, he kidnapped 2 people, tortured them for days, mutilated their bodies, and threw them off in a lake there in Tennessee. When they caught that young man, they couldn't believe he was the one that committed a murder like that. They said 6 months earlier, everybody that knew him said he was the one of the nicest, quietest, most meekest boys in our community, or in their community, I mean. And in a matter of 6 months of heavy meth use, that nice, quiet, meek boy became a killer, and you never know who this drug is going to affect like that. Here's another home with 3 kids. You can see the dog species laying all over the floor. There's not a word in the English language or any other language bad enough for me to describe the conditions a lot of children are forced to live in nowadays in our country because of drug addiction, especially meth. Very harsh conditions. These are not only harsh conditions on a child, these are harsh conditions on an adult or a child. But at least 35% of these pictures I'm showing you here have got children present, and a lot of times the kids start blaming themselves for the way they're being treated. I'll never forget my daughter telling somebody in a TV interview one time, she said, I didn't think that my mom and dad loved me and the rest of the kids anymore because of the way that they was treating us. And she was actually blaming herself. We all know it ain't the kids' fault. It's the adults who make the conscious decision to put these poisons in their bodies. Here's a home where the users was hiding their methamphetamine in a baby sippy cup. You know, a little kid finds it, they're not going to know that's meth in that cup. They're going to pick it up, try to drink it, end up killing themselves. But when you're strung out on dope, we don't think about the danger we put our children in, and sometimes we don't even care. Here's another home where the police come in. There was a baby crawler right beside that box of used needles. This is a 13-year-old girl's bedroom wall where she wrote, "Help me," on her wall because she was living in such harsh conditions. This is what her bathroom looked like. Here's another bathroom where a little boy was coming to school and he was so dirty, the teacher sent the CPS over to his house to check on his situations. What they found out was the little boy couldn't take a bath. He had no running water. All the sinks were stopped up. But what I want you to notice is these gross, disgusting used needles left laying around. They noticed that most of children's hospitals across the country, when they bring little bitty kids into the hospital out of a home where people are leaving dirty needles laying around, a lot of the very small children was picking those dirty needles up and playing with them like they're a toy. They don't know any better than to do that. And they was poking themselves all over, just like this little girl, giving themselves whatever kind of disease is on the end of that needle. And I see a lot of, quite a few young people here tonight. I want to tell you, young kids that are here tonight, if you run up on a needle out on the street or a meth pipe or anything that I showed you, whatever you do, don't touch that thing. Go tell your parents or a teacher so they can get the proper person to come pick it up. But don't you touch it. This is what a meth lab looks like. Sometimes it may look like a chemist's laboratory in a high school or a college. 9 times out of 10, though, a meth lab is just going to look like a bunch of garbage laying around on your property. Empty coffee filter boxes, empty box of Sudafed pills, maybe starter fluid cans with holes poked in one end of them, maybe 2-liter bottles or some kind of Pepsi or Coke product bottle with the rubber hose sticking out the top, or a gas jug with a hose sticking out the top. If you walk up on something that you think is a meth lab, whatever you do, don't touch nothing. Definitely don't open the lids on these fruit jars. If that metal part is rusted up and you try twisting the top, sometimes that rust can cause a static charge that will set a little spark off that will cause the ether inside the jar to blow up in your face. That's usually what that is in the jar, is ether. Also, never open the valve on a propane tank if you find one sitting around somewhere it shouldn't be sitting, like in a ditch or somewhere. This is a very dangerous time of the year for meth because most of the places across the country with spring hitting, you know, we had the farming starting to go on, and these guys are stealing the anhydrous ammonia, this fertilizer farmers use. They can put it in any kind of jug they want to, but they usually put it in these propane tanks. If they've been putting it in there very long, it's going to turn this copper piece here a bluish looking green. Anhydrous ammonia is a fertilizer that will attack your respiratory system, can kill you. If you spill it on yourself, it sucks the moisture out of your body. It's very cold. They call it anhydrous burn, but actually it's very cold and it would deteriorate the flesh. I've got a picture I used to show high school students of a guy that spilled anhydrous on himself. He stole a drinking thermos full of it. He got in his pickup truck. The drinking thermos turned over. Anhydrous ran all over his right butt cheek. This is the weirdest looking picture you ever seen in your life. Of course, his butt had healed up, but it was a jail picture. They had him with his pants down to his knees. He had one left butt cheek. His right butt cheek, it was just gone. It wasn't there. Like a gator bit him in the butt or something. But my wife told me that picture was too gross to take it off the program. And I really didn't think any picture was too gross for my program. But seeing she's the boss, I had to take it off the program. I like to call this section of my program the Angels in Black. For so many children in our country, everyday angels come dressed in black. And they definitely are the kids' angels. Without these guys going in these toxic environments, putting their lives on the line, more of these little kids will be dying every day in our country. I not only think that the police are angels to the babies, they're also angels to the meth cooks themselves. Just last night in Kentucky, I talked at a graduation program that they got going over in Kentucky called a drug court. And it's where they had sent some meth offenders. They went through a 1.5-year long program and been sober for a long time. And it's a pretty extensive program. They're really keeping the watch on them. But that's what I told that group last night, that they had angels that they never even dreamed of before. Because I know the meth cooks, when they get busted, they don't look at the police as angels. When I went to prison, I didn't look at the police as angels. But looking back, I realized by me going to prison, it saved my life. At least it prolonged my life, because I was about to die. I was using drugs so heavy. And I love people so much nowadays. I don't want to see nobody go to prison. It can be a tough place, but I'd rather see a person in prison where I know that they're going to be fed 3 times a day. They have a chance of at least prolonging their life or even saving their life, than being on the street using meth, because there's only one end of this drug, and that's death. They're going to die sooner than God intended for them to, unless they stop using. That's why I say that. When the police come into a meth lab, they're going to be dressed in these biohazard suits. They dress like that for a reason. There's the bottles I talked about, the rubber hoses sticking out the top. They dress like that because they learned the hard way that these chemicals cause cancer and they can cause damage to your body that will last the rest of your life, so please be careful. Never go in a meth lab. The meth cooks nowadays booby trap their meth labs with every kind of booby trap you can think of. And these guys don't care if they kill an 8-year-old kid or 80-year-old granddad. The reason I say that is because if they cared, they wouldn't set up no death trap like that. They told us back home, told my sheriff when they caught them doing it, setting up shotgun traps and things like that they did it because they was paranoid. Other meth cooks was trying to steal their chemicals, you know, like their $2.50 can of starter fluid, or their anhydrous ammonia. Is that not the stupidest thing you ever heard of? Kill somebody over a $2.50 can of starter fluid? But that's what I mean. These guys aren't thinking straight, so please be careful. I started getting high at the age of 13 years old. My dad, next to me shooting a basketball. I didn't see my dad from the time I was 5 till I was about 12. But when I started visiting him in the summers, I started getting high with him. I don't blame my dad for nothing that's happened to me. It wasn't right for him to turn me on the drugs, but I had God give us all a free will. I could have chose not to use those drugs, but I chose to put them in my system. So I take full responsibility for my actions. I try to encourage young people, no matter how you've been mistreated or what kind of cards life has dealt you, at some point you've got to stand up and take responsibility for your own actions. We can't go through life blaming all the bad things we do on them circumstances. I try to do that. I had opportunities to go to college and play basketball on scholarships, but by the time I was a senior in high school, this picture, I was smoking dope every day, drinking alcohol on the weekends, and had been turned on to cocaine. Once I got hooked on cocaine, I no longer cared about going to college playing ball. All I really cared about was where I was going to get that next bag of dope at. I got out of high school, married my high school sweetheart. The marriage didn't last very long because she was a good Christian girl and she had married a drug addict and alcoholic, and I was a mean and abusive man to her. So when the marriage failed, I moved to Dallas, Texas. Right when I didn't think anything in my life could get any worse, I moved into a crank house in Dallas. I'd never heard of crank before. But But when they offered it to me and told me it was a speed form, I tried it, and the first time I tried it, I knew that was my drug of choice. Our statistics tell us that 90-something percent of people that try this drug end up getting hooked. Some people don't believe the number's really that high. I believe the number's definitely that high for people who was like me, who already have issues with other drugs. It does seem like they become hooked the first time, or at least they know that's going to be their drug of choice. Every one of my friends who I've seen try meth, every one of them in Tennessee got hooked on it. Now, some of them are dead, some of them are in prison. In the beginning, the meth made me feel strong and full of energy. I thought I was thinking clearer than I never thought before, but I would only do it on the weekends. I watched other people in the crank house stay up for a week at a time. They talked about hallucinating. They acted weird. And I remember thinking back then at 21 years old, I thought, man, I'm never going to let this dope control me like these old guys let it control them. But nobody controls this drug. I don't care who it is using. It always controls the user. I left Texas and come back to Tennessee a year and a half later. It was a few years down the road, I met my second wife, Amy, and got her pregnant. Instead of taking care of her and the baby like a man ought to do, I was a dope dealer for 23 years. I was on drugs, and for 20, I grew and sold marijuana. It was harvest time. I had 25 pounds of pot. I told her I was going to take it to Tulsa, Oklahoma, to sell it, make me some fast, easy money. I'd be back in a couple of months. That's what I used to would have told you, all of your kids. They could make fast, easy money selling dope for me. But the truth is, there's no fast, easy money selling drugs. I don't personally know anybody who's ever gotten rich from selling dope. And I know a lot of dope dealers, but most of them were just like me. We sold drugs just to support our own drug habits. And I don't care if they offer me all the money in the world to sell a kid drugs nowadays, just one joint. All the money in the world. There's no way I would do it. I know I'd be selling that kid death and destruction, but I didn't think about it like that back then. I made it to Oklahoma, went out there 3 weeks before the police raided the house, sent me to McAllister, Oklahoma State Prison. Instead of being 2 months when I got home, it was almost 2 years later. This is a picture of me when I got out of prison. That's my daughter sitting in my lap. She had been born and she was just about to turn 2. I married her mother, and it's about a year later when meth hit Tennessee in the mid-90s there, about 94, in my area real heavy. I got back to using. I no longer just do it a couple of days. I started staying up 4 or 5 days, and I started hallucinating. I got to seeing some of the same stuff them guys in Texas talked about seeing years earlier. One of the weirdest things to me about this drug is a meth user can be in California or Canada or Tennessee. We hallucinate a lot of the same things. I got to see what we call shadow people. One of the most common things for meth users start out seeing. In the beginning, I would see movement out the corner of my eye. I would turn and look, it'd be nothing there. But as my addiction got worse, I could be in front of this many people. And if I was strung out, I could watch shadows walking around the room, seeing all kinds of other weird stuff. My wife started trying to get me to quit, not because I was seeing things, but because I was becoming more mean and aggressive toward her and other people in the community. But I started thinking, instead of me quitting, I need to get her using with me. I thought if I get her to use with me, she'll quit nagging me about wanting me to quit all the time. Plus, most of us men know if we get young women hooked on drugs like cocaine or methamphetamine, we can use and abuse those girls, and they'll take that abuse. For one thing, they're not thinking straight, and plus they'll have a dependency on us for the drug. I started telling my wife she ought to try it. It wasn't as bad as everybody said. It'd only make her feel good. She talked about wanting to lose weight. I said, meth will help you lose weight, and it will. For most people, it's an appetite suppressant. But what it'll do is actually starve you to death. And, you know, it sounds cold-blooded, me saying that I would give my wife something that would kill her, because it is cold-blooded. But I didn't care about my wife at the time. I didn't care about myself. Like I said from the beginning, what was king of my life was the drug. And if you tell somebody enough times it's not going to hurt, it's only going to make them feel good, especially somebody that loves you, most people are going to try it. My wife tried it, and the first time she tried it, she believed she was hooked on it. That's when my kids started suffering the most. That's who always suffers the most, is the children. Before, they always had their mama to take care of them when I was locked up in the back room doing dope deals, using drugs for 2 or 3 days at a time. But now I got their mama locked up back there with me. But I would have told you a few years ago I thought I was a pretty good dad. I justified it in my mind by thinking, well, I don't do the drugs in front of my kids. That's how I thought I was being a pretty good parent. I'd have told you I got a dope room in the back of my house like most other parents I know do it. If my kids need me, all they got to do is come back here and knock on that door, and I'm there for them. But the truth is, I never was there for them. My kids were severely neglected. If you ask my oldest daughter what she remembers about the years of me and her mother using drugs, what she'll tell you is that it seemed like that we fought every day. And that's how my house was. It seemed like almost every day at the end of the addiction, it was just screaming and hollering, and it was hell on earth for children. I come home one day strung out, been up for about 4 days, got in a fight with my wife Amy and slapped her in the face like I'd done so many other times when I would lose my temper on this drug. But this time, I reached under the bed and grabbed the 12-gauge shotgun, put it to her forehead and pulled the trigger, threatening to kill her. I dry fired the gun at her. This time, Amy called the police. She normally didn't call the police when we had fights. I had always told her to keep our business in our family. I'd tell her something about the police don't care nothing about helping you anyways, and how ridiculous it is. If somebody's hurting you or somebody you love, by all means, call the police. I guarantee they'll be able to help you. Thank God this time she did. They come over, took my guns away from me, took me to jail for marijuana. I'm not supposed to have any guns, you know, being a convicted felon. Wasn't very long until I got out of jail and come home, and by that point, I started becoming suicidal. Suicide is so common with meth users that before the day's over, there'll be more than one person across the United States that has tried to commit suicide today or been successful at it because of the depression and anxiety brought on by this drug. I was in a half a dozen high schools just last year where teenagers, half a dozen of them, where teenagers had committed suicide the year before. The last school was a police chief of the town's daughter took his own gun and did it because of depression and anxiety from meth. I'd gotten out of jail. My wife and kids were staying with their grandparents. And I had been seeing things so long, it no longer freaked me out when I would see stuff. Most of the time I knew I was hallucinating, but I never got used to the noises and the voices that come along with meth. For me, it started like I could hear people whispering, but it sounded like they was too far off. I couldn't make out what they were saying. Then it sounded like noises in my house of people walking around and stuff. That day's the first day I remember hearing a man's voice. And hearing these voices are pretty common for a lot of real heavy users. I had a young man, 24 years old, called me last year from a Wilmer, Minnesota jail, want me to come visit him. His aunt had seen me talking the night before. I didn't know him, but they call me like that quite often. And if I have a chance, I'll go visit him. I'd worked at that police office about 3 different times. They let me visit the young man. When I got in there talking to him, he was crying uncontrollable. He said he'd been strung out on meth, and him and his wife had split up, and he was living in his uncle's basement. He said, I heard a man's voice tell me that my wife had been cheating on me a number of different times. He said, I got up and went over to her house and kicked the front door in, and he hurt the lady so bad physically, he almost killed her. That young man sitting in state prison right now in Minnesota. His wife wasn't cheating on him. That's just what the drug told him. That voice told me that day, said, your wife and kids would be better off if you was dead. And it would sound like an audible voice, something I had never experienced. And then that voice said, the world would be a better place without a guy like you. And what that voice said to me next wouldn't have been a thing in the world to me if I'd have been told about Jesus through my grandfather who was a preacher and my mother my entire life. But that old dragon always knows our breaking point. Everybody has different breaking points. He said, you really think Jesus is going to forgive you for the things you've done and the people that you've hurt? And I remember like it was yesterday saying out loud, I said, no, I don't think he will. I've done some terrible things in my life, and I've hurt a lot of people physically and emotionally, not only in my own family, but across this country. I am a born-again Christian now. I didn't come here this afternoon to push my beliefs on you. I'm only here sharing my story with you. I respect other people's beliefs. I only hope that you respect mine. I got up out of my chair, went to my barn, and tied a rope up in my barn, going to hang myself. About that time, my sister pulled up to check on me. I thought if I'm going to do this, I got to get her out of here. I sent her to town to get me some stuff. Before her car got going down the road good, I had that rope around my neck and was stepping off my old riding lawnmower. It just started choking me and hurting. I tried to grab the wrappers, and I couldn't reach them. I tried to get my foot back up on that mower, but it was too late to change my mind. In a matter of seconds, I was unconscious. When I woke up, my sister had found me. The rope had burnt and cut me from ear to ear. It took me about a week to get to where I could swallow again, but I was still alive. The rope was broken too. I tell people, I guess when my body went into a convulsion and started jerking when I went unconscious, that my body weight snapped that old rope I used. But I know the Lord saved my life that day. I didn't take advantage of that situation like I should have. They sent me to a preacher instead of a rehab center. We didn't know any rehab centers back then for meth. But what I try to encourage people, even if it's not specialized in meth, still you need to go to a support group. I got off of dope for about 5 months. A preacher helped me. But when I went back to work, I thought I could hang around my old buddies I had been using with. That showed my ignorance about addiction. 5 months with no time to put myself back in that situation. I thought I could handle it. That's where I needed that support group. In a matter of just a few weeks, I was back to using. When I got back to using, I just give up. I thought, what's the use of trying to quit? I'll never get away from this drug. And each time I went back to using, it got worse and worse. That was another huge mistake I made, was giving up. It doesn't matter if a person tries to quit an addiction 1,000 times and they fail. As long as you keep trying, eventually one day you're going to be able to quit. Never give up like I did. I started staying up 8, 9, 10 days. My routine was eat a couple of sandwiches in a 7-day period, about as much as I would eat. I went from 200 plus pounds to 160. I no longer felt strong. I couldn't think clear. This is a picture of me just a couple months before I shot myself when I'd been up for 4 or 5 days. It's not a prison picture, even though it says Tennessee across the top. It's actually where I was having my license renewed because I was running drugs from Oklahoma to Tennessee that day. And you know, I didn't want to go to Oklahoma and pick up that dope with not having no license. I had to be, you know, legal. I'm going to tell you some of the things that we do, man. We're on this stuff. You know, I can stand back now and laugh about it, but I mean, just really, it's crazy. My wife tells me it doesn't like the same guy. When this picture was taken, when I got out of prison, I wasn't using meth. I'm happy, I'm healthy. To this picture here, just a couple months, like I said before, I shot myself. Meth is such an evil drug. What I believe that it does, like most addictions, is that it robs people of the ability to be able to feel love and compassion for other human beings. That's why we see parents that will beat their kids to death, like we've seen in Tennessee, burn them with cigarettes, cut their heads off, drown them in the bathtubs, because they have lost the ability to even feel emotions for their own children. It isn't that they don't love them deep down their heart. I believe that they do. I always love my kids deep down in my heart. I just couldn't show it. This drug wouldn't let that love come through like it's supposed to. One thing I think all meth addicts also share in common is paranoia. The longer a person's on this drug, the more severe the paranoia is going to become. I started telling my wife she needed to buy me some guns. I said, all the other drug dealers I run around with have got guns. And I said, they're going to break in our house to steal the dope I've been bragging about having, kill me and you, the kids, to get it. That scared Amy enough that she bought me 2 guns. I picked out an SKS assault rifle and a .22 automatic. She wished many times she had bought me them guns. I ended up threatening her with them. I put over 200 bullet holes in my home where I went completely insane on this drug. Would think I'd hear people walking upstairs and think it was the other drug dealers. I'd go through my house blowing holes in my ceiling, screaming and hollering, cussing I was going to kill them. I'd get upstairs, there'd be nobody there. My wife and kids would be telling me, Daddy, we didn't hear nobody. But I was so convinced somebody was up there. I started accusing my wife of being in with the other drug dealers. I accused her of everything you can imagine. She said she couldn't take that lifestyle no longer. She quit using drugs, started going to church, gave her life over to God, started praying for me to be able to quit. But by this point, I couldn't seem to quit, and I had become suicidal most all the time. I thought the only way out for me was death. The worst mistake I ever made in my life was thinking killing myself was going to make my wife or kids better off, or anybody better off. Killing yourself is never the answer to a problem. I don't care how bad a situation is a person's in, as long as they're still breathing, things can always get better. You never know what's around the corner for you. I couldn't see it like that back then. I come home at 9:30 in the morning, 21st of February, 2003. My wife and kids was moving to their grandparents. I was begging her to stay. And at the end of my addiction, I had become physically sick. I had a form of Parkinson's disease set in where my arms shook all the time, and I got sick that morning. I asked Amy to lay down and talk about it. She agreed to, but as soon as she laid down with me, she said, I'm going to lay here and talk to you for a minute. She said, but me and the kids are still going to leave. When she said that, something in me snapped. I reached over her, grabbed my SKS rifle, laid on my stomach, and pushed the barrel up under my chin. And I thought, man, that's it. I'm going to blow my head off. This dope has robbed me of everything. She screamed and reached over to grab the barrel up under my chin. Before she could grab it, I pulled the trigger. The bullet went in me right here, come out between my eyes, breaking every bone in my face except my left eye socket, blowing my nose off, all my front teeth out. It blew teeth and bone into my wife's right arm. They dug out later, and the doctor said he thought that's what saved my life, was somehow the bullet blast blow most of the bone and the teeth fragments and things out away from me, instead of blowing them back in toward me where it would have blinded me or sent them through my brain and killed me. These pictures I'm going to show you are from the Sheriff's Department in Tennessee. I told my sheriff what I want to do with them. He let me have them. We've taken them all over the country and halfway around the world. We hope in another year or so we will have them all around the world. They're pretty gross pictures. I didn't put them on here to gross nobody out. I put them on here to try to show young people the reality of what drug addiction will cause somebody to do to themselves and to their families. And I know a lot of young people think it won't happen to me. I never thought nothing like this would happen to me either. I actually remember, and I don't tell this at every program, but when I was 17 years old in high school, they brought 3 convicts in my high school doing programs, trying to tell us kids how selling drugs had ruined their lives. They was in prison. I'll never forget sitting in the top of the bleachers, mad because my principal made me go in there next to my girlfriend, high on marijuana. I looked over at my girlfriend and I told her, I said, man, what a bunch of losers. I said, what do I got to come in here and listen to this crap today for? I said, I'll never end up like them losers. That's what I told her. You can imagine how I thought about them men 10 years later, shackled on a prison bus going to state prison, thinking, man, I wish I had listened to them guys. And it makes my heart weigh heavy thinking that young people think that about me. And I know some of them probably do think that they'll never end up like me. I pray to God that they don't, but I know they're playing Russian roulette with their life if they're fooling around with these drugs. We can't pick out which one's going to be a drug addict, which one's going to be an alcoholic, get in the car and kill somebody or commit suicide. There's no possible way we can do that. So they're definitely playing Russian roulette with their lives. I have had a couple of people pass out looking at these pictures. If you don't like the sight of blood, you should look at them. If you do feel yourself getting dizzy or faint, you'll get up and go get a drink of water and some fresh air. I've seen some smaller, I don't know how young these guys are, bring all my kids through the program with me. My kids go from 4 to 15, but that's up to each parent. And if you guys don't want your kids to see these pictures because they are very graphic, now would be the time to have them look away. So as the gun blast went off, you would think that it would knock me unconscious, breaking all the bones in my face, but it didn't. Meth is such a strong stimulant that it kept me awake during all of it. I remember hearing the gun blast. I felt my face blow apart. I fell off onto the floor, grabbed my face on both sides, trying to hold it together. My wife went to screaming. Some of my kids ran back here to the bedroom. They would stand over the top of me. I could hear them screaming. I told my wife I was sorry. I said, don't let the kids see me. And what I meant was, don't let them see my face, because, of course, they could see me laying there. But my wife kept trying to pull my hands away to see how bad it was, because it happened so fast, she didn't know how bad I was hurt, but I never would let her. I thought the whole front of my face had actually blown off. But the kids knew I was hurt real bad. They could see all the blood I was laying in. She ran and got a telephone call at 911. My wife did. By the time she got on the phone with the dispatchers, my mother ran into the room. My kids had called my mother earlier that morning, who lived right up the road from us back then. We since had moved. But I'll never forget my mom getting there right after I pulled the trigger, standing over the top of me, screaming, crying, yelling, why did you do that? I told my mom I was sorry, I didn't know, and that was the truth. If you had asked me moments earlier, I could have told you a couple of reasons, but when that pain hit me and sobered me up a little, I remember laying on the floor thinking, man, why did you do that? Nothing is that bad. I had a beautiful wife, 6 wonderful kids, a good job. I actually had everything a man could ask for, but I was miserable from years of drug addiction. You just started out smoking a joint, drinking a beer. I never dreamed I would grow up and be a drug addict and alcoholic. They wanted to airlift me from my house in Nashville, Tennessee to a trauma center, but the helicopter pilot was picking somebody else up. The other pilot couldn't fly in bad weather. They decided to take me to a local hospital. The sheriff's department had wrote me off for being dead. They said they didn't think there was no way I could make it. My family's holding out hope. They got me to that little local hospital. The doctors told my wife and family, they said, we got to get into Nashville to a trauma center, or we're afraid he's going to die. We're not equipped for this kind of injury. When they told my wife that, she was just so much shocked that day. She said, what do you mean he's going to die? She said he was just talking to us at home. She didn't even realize I was hurt that day. She don't remember seeing any blood. She was just covered in it. They told her and the police there was no way I talked to anybody. They said the tip of my tongue was blown off. The rest of my tongue was split in two, and the roof of my mouth was disintegrated, as you can see in this picture. How can you talk without them parts? But I did. I talked to the police, the paramedics, my wife, my mother. All the way I could explain that in my own mind was I believe God gave me the ability that day to tell those 2 women I was sorry. Because when I woke up 3 days later in Nashville, it took me 2 months to learn how to start speaking again. And about a year before you could understand most everything that I say. I show this picture just to show you I really was awake even though my eyes was closed. You can see here how I'm squeezing my right forearm with my left hand because I was in so much pain. I didn't actually go unconscious until the ambulance ride. They decided to take me 2.5 hours in the ambulance. They didn't think I could make that trip. They told my family the best thing they could do was go home and start praying. It didn't look good. So they took my wife home, gathered around there praying. My cousin said they was actually waiting on a phone call that I had passed away. They didn't want to take Amy to Nashville to get the news. She was in so much shock. And when they didn't get that phone call in a couple of hours, then they started into Nashville behind us. And my wife took these pictures about 13 hours later. They closed my face up the first time. I was so lucky God put that one paramedic that he put in my life that day. He'd worked in Memphis for years. He'd seen a lot of gunshot victims. And his colleagues said he was one of the best paramedics we had in our county, and thank goodness he was working. He saved my life twice. The first time when my throat swelled up, he ran an oxygen tube down my throat, got me some air. The second time was in the ambulance when my heart stopped beating and I was dying. He ran a main line into one of the arteries of my heart, started pumping some kind of adrenaline chemicals into my heart, giving me different types of CPR, got my heart going and brought me back. I since have got to meet the guy and thank him for saving my life. I don't remember nothing for 3 days. I woke up 3 days later. I can't see hardly nothing out of my right eye anymore because of the gunshot wound. But that day I couldn't see out of my good eye because of swelling of blood past the foot of the bed. I didn't recognize a woman walking up to me, so she was right in my face. It was my wife. She was smiling, telling me that she loved me. And she was telling me she found out over that 3 days in the waiting room that she was pregnant with our 7th baby. That's what I meant earlier when I said you never know what's around the corner for you. I didn't know my wife was pregnant the day I shot myself. She didn't either. I don't think really that it would have made any difference, but I know if I'd have died, I wouldn't have got to meet my last son. I told my wife I wanted to name the boy Gabriel after the messenger angel because I knew he was a gift from God to me like all my kids have been. And I really personally believe that's what all kids are. They're gifts from God. That's up to us how we want to treat them and treat that gift, that is. I'm going to tell you about tweeting. I'm going to be done. Tweet's a term used by law enforcement and meth addicts. Just a nickname we give somebody when they're really high. We say they're tweaking or they're spun out. Lots of different nicknames, but that's when they're in their most dangerous stage. They may be seeing things or hearing stuff, and it doesn't take no 3 days for them to get there. A heavy user can be tweaking within a few hours of if they take enough dope. Don't go around them by yourself if you can help it. Keep a 7 to 10 foot distance away from them. Police are told not to shine a bright light in their eyes when they pull them over at night if they think they're tweaking because their pupils stay big and dilated, won't adjust the light properly, and that shock of that bright light might make them run and become violent. Slow your speech, lower the pitch of your voice. They're already hearing noise at a louder, faster pace. That's where a lot of child abuse comes in, I believe. The kids are crying, they need somebody to love on them, but the user can't deal with that stress and that noise, and they end up doing something terrible to the kids to try to make them be quiet instead of loving on them. Slow your movement, especially if you get in an argument with them, those fast arm moves, and they misinterpret as an aggressive move. Once again, keep your hands visible. Don't stick them in your purse or your back pocket, especially if you're arguing with them, because these guys are so paranoid. Most of the older ones, the heavy users, are packing knives and guns out of fear and paranoia. This drug brings on. If you make them feel threatened, they won't hesitate to hurt you. And you may think, well, that's my friend or my family member. They would never hurt me. But listen, 90% of the time, the alcoholic and drug addict ends up hurting and killing the people closest to them. They're not the same when they're all doped up as when they're not. I love the way that they said it on that tweet tape out of California. They had a doctor or a counselor on there. He said what makes a meth addict extremely dangerous, and I agree 100% with this. He said to the outside world, it appears they become aggressive for no apparent reason. He said, but in that user's mind, they feel like their life is on the line and feel like there's a real threat when there really is no threat. And that is the truth. That's what makes it so dangerous. Also, keep that tweaker talking until you get away from them. A lot of times when they become quiet, they may start having some weird paranoid thoughts about you in that stage. So if it is a friend or family member that you do want to confront, don't confront them by yourself. I don't suggest confront them until they come down, but if you can't wait, a lot of times you can't, don't do it by yourself. Keep them talking until you get away, get another friend or family member to come back with you and confront them. The main thing is to be extremely careful because they can go from smiling to in a rage in a blink of an eye. That's a picture of my wife and 7 kids. Of course, my daughter Sarah, David, and Josiah, and Rachel, and Rebecca, and Abigail, my son Gabriel, and my daughter Sarah's dog Blaze, which really has adopted me. He sleeps with me every night, sheds on my bed instead of hers. Maybe he doesn't like me. Maybe that's why he does it. He just acts like he does. I don't know. Together we can make a difference in this fight. It takes all of us working together. If you have a friend or a family member who is struggling with addiction, let them know how much you care about them. Encourage them to go get help and treatment. The addicts are the most self-pity people in the world. They think, man, nobody loves me. Nobody believes in me. I don't know why alcohol and drugs do that to us, but it does. That's why I say, let them know how much you care about them, love them. But it takes all of us working together.